Last but not least, we're going to hear a story from Parisa, who is actually from a group called Greener and Cleaner Bromley, which is not part of the transition movement, but I think shares many of the kind of similar values and approaches. So yeah, it's a group that is based in Southeast London, has grown incredibly quickly in the short time period that it's been started up. Now has a Facebook group of over 7,000 supporters, engaged in local action on climate, biodiversity and pollution. And they also now have a really exciting sustainability hub in a shopping centre in Bromley. And this is a model which they are now starting to share with others across the country. So Parisa has many brilliant insights and lessons to share with us all. And I'm going to hand over to her to tell us the story. Parisa.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Hi, my name is Parisa Wright. I'm the founder and CEO of Greener and Cleaner. I set it up about 3 years ago, early 2019. After I returned from maternity leave, I'd spent a year at home with my baby, seeing all of the student strikes on screen and just feeling completely helpless. And as I was preparing to go back to work, I was sort of walking down my road and seeing that people didn't really know how to recycle. And I felt like that was the minimum we should be able to sort of share information on and get right at this point, kind of thing. I was also living in the London Borough with the highest sort of car ownership per person. And though it has 52% green belt, we also have quite a high number of deaths from air pollution because of the age of our population. But what I felt was sort of alone and isolated. I felt like, people weren't really engaging, and there was a kind of a stigma attached to being engaged with sustainability. And it was sort of, that whole idea that, anyone who cares about the environment is a crusty or a nut job or whatever. And I was like, well, I'm a solicitor. I got 2 children. I have got a car. I go on a holiday occasionally. I eat some meat. I'm kind of trying to cut it all down. But, I feel like if we could all just get to grips with the fact that this is relevant to us all and we can all benefit personally, we're not talking about, polar bears, etc. We're talking about literally in our own community, we can benefit and we can work together and we can deal with loneliness and mental health issues at the same time as physical well-being, at the same time as reducing our costs. And it all comes down to communication, and that's what I felt was missing, and community engagement, people feeling like they knew their neighbours, they could work together. So basically I set up this small group on Facebook, and our first meeting, we had meetings from the off, and so as Margaret said, that having that meeting monthly was really helpful for building us up, and also having the Facebook presence was really helpful for building us up. But that meeting every month, we went from 20 people to sort of 50 people, and online we went from 20 people to 2,000 people. And then, now we're sort of just over 3 years later, and we've got sort of over 7,000 households who are reaching and who we're interacting with, whether on Facebook, on our website, Twitter, etc., in terms of different people and households. And it's really, really exciting. But what was really lovely was suddenly I realized that I wasn't alone, that there were other people who cared about it, and that actually by all of us visibly doing things, like it started off with things like us meeting once a month and doing litter picks and organising community events like sharing skills for mending, sharing skills for composting, getting our head of recycling from the council to come and do a myth busting session, because, we realised that actually what you need to think about is a combination of what's the high impact stuff. So that's energy efficiency, cutting down meat, where your money is, but also what are those sort of gateway areas of sustainability that will draw people in. Actually people to begin with are interested in trees, or they're interested in recycling, or they're interested in their children's lung capacity. And that's sort of a slightly more kind of impactful one as well, because at the same time as dealing with that, you're dealing with, obviously car use, etc. So we tried to make sure that we were listening to what the community wanted, and we were also talking to and listening to different community groups so that we could get insights from people that we weren't necessarily connecting with on our Facebook group, so that we could be putting on local free events. And obviously this is all on a volunteer basis, right? This is all just people who get it and they're worried about it because they're worried about the community. They just logically understand that the climate crisis has to be dealt with, or they've got children or grandchildren, etc., and they're connecting with it in that way. There's lots of different ways that people connect, but we sort of tried to identify that. And I suppose my legal background was helpful because, that gives me my problem solving background, but that also gives me my communication and working out, how you speak to different people to get them to connect. Because ultimately, I honestly believe, I grew up, in England. I'm half Iranian, half English. I grew up in England, and I always thought on religion, well, ultimately, I know this is a controversial thing to say, but ultimately they all believe the same thing. They all believe that we should be taking care of ourselves, we should be taking care of our families, we should be taking care of our communities, we should be good to each other. And I really believe that human beings, you have to find that connection with themselves personally and their families. But once they get it, and once they can celebrate that with their community, then they do want to help their communities. They do want to help their wider circle. And I'm not saying necessarily they'll instantly, in Bromley, want to help Scotland or something, but it grows. And I think that precedent and that modeling, as one more person, one more family starts getting it, and they start talking to their family members, they start talking to their friends, they start inviting their friend who, I don't know, has an addiction to shopping at Primark or wherever it is, just constantly buying clothes, that the idea that don't get anxious about the plastic on your food shopping. 90% of clothing these days is made of plastic, but we just don't think about it that way. Just trying to get people to think about the things that they're anxious about, and whether we can support them in that, whether their family and friends who are in the group can help them, deal with that anxiety and realize that actually you're not alone. These are things that you can get involved in. It doesn't cost you any money. It's all local to you. I think it's been really empowering for a lot of us, and well-being and mental health has been a thing that has run through it all. That feeling of being part of a community and being able to help, but also sort of that feeling of not feeling cynical or overwhelmed, because actually now how that school street or how that cycle lane or how that Green Homes grant can benefit you and your family. It's not just about someone putting money in their pockets or someone getting preference over you. Actually, all of these things, as they benefit what looks like a different group to you, benefits you personally, benefits the strain on the NHS, benefits the local sort of like strain on welfare, benefits, your local biodiversity, your local community spirit, all of these things that benefit you personally, and being able to sort of bring that back to how it helps people has been really, really helpful. So where are we now? So we went from that 20 people to that 7,000 plus people who are connecting with us and working with us. And on top of that, we're working with, at least 30 different community groups locally. And then I'd say at least another 10, 20 charities and stakeholders in London and nationally, in order to grow what we're doing, in order to collaborate, in order to learn best practice and really be as inclusive and accessible as possible. So where we are now is that my CSO, Claire Searle, who is an absolute legend, really made an impact last year. I ended up being off with some burnout because I was trying to do my 4-day-a-week legal job, my 2 and my 4-year-old during the pandemic, and trying to run this charity. And, there wasn't much let up in any of those things. So she really, really helped press us forward last year while I was a bit out of action. And she basically negotiated with LaSalle, who own the Glades, to give us access to a really prominent shop unit. So not something in the back of a library, not something in a church hall, not something in a civic centre, but a mainstream setting. A mainstream setting where obviously that shopping centre, that town centre benefits from this experiential, community-driven, free, accessible sort of offering, this resource for the community. And I believe that's something that a lot of us can draw on now, that I believe a lot of councils and a lot of shopping centres are open to those conversations, whether it's about a pop-up or whether it's a 3-year lease like we've got, very fortunately. Negotiating something that is either subsidized or free, that is really allowing you to make use of the idea that this needs to be a mainstream conversation that's not siloed on Facebook, that's not siloed in a community centre or a library. And as part of that, Claire managed to bring in, we've been trying to get Library of Things into our borough for a long time. And so as part of us getting that unit, we've also managed to bring Library of Things into their first mainstream unit, which is really exciting because, again, hitherto, they've been in shopping centres, they've been in libraries. We're now in a shopping centre and we're bringing them into this shopping centre. And this isn't, I hate to say it, some rundown, small, the Mall in Bromley. This is not some sort of forgotten part of the high street that needs revamping. This is the sort of very popular, very mainstream, very commercial shopping centre in Bromley, and one of the biggest ones in southeast London, and very popular. So people come from neighbouring boroughs to it. And the shopping centre is next to McDonald's, it's next to H&M and New Look, it's next to the Entertainer, and it's next to Waterstones as well. But it means that we're reaching people who are not involved in this conversation hitherto, whereas in a library you might not be, reaching out so much. So that's really, really exciting. And as a result of this, sort of I came on board again last September to start helping with trying to get fundraising for this amazing project, because obviously we learned that volunteers are fantastic, but they will burn out if they're not actually dedicating some work time to this, etc., etc. So we did some fundraising, and we've managed to raise money to bring in actual paid roles, so part-time paid roles, but between those part-time paid roles, they cover the hub 5 days a week. They provide youth access. The lottery has funded our youth outreach team for 1 day a week, plus a massive project to go into schools. We've managed to get funding for setting up the hub, for doing some workshops out of the hub, but also really, really excitingly, because we want to make a blueprint that everyone can benefit from, right? But really excitingly, we are going to be able to embed in that blueprint behavioural science research. So obviously the likes of fossil fuel companies, aviation companies, blah, 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 they've spent billions over the years on psychology and behavioural science, telling themselves what they need to do in order to reach people without people even realising it. What we hope to do is do a massive research project with Imperial University. And we've got stage 1 funded with Bayes and with Imperial and with some other partners. But what we want to do now is get stage 2 funded, so we can find a corporate or another charity to work with to get stage 2 funded. But essentially it's about using this bricks and mortar setting for 3 years, which we've got, to do real in-depth granular research about what different groups within different demographics want to hear in terms of language in order to get impactful engagement with sustainable living, the kind of media they want us to use, the kind of activities they want. Do they want to be out in nature? Do they want to be mending something? Do they want to sit down and listen to a talk? Do they want to look at a website? And finally, what is that sort of gateway area of sustainability that will bring them through the door, or that will automatically make them sit up and listen, as opposed to the opposite, which will automatically make them shut down, go defensive, and not want to have any of the conversation. So that is going to be the basis for this research. We've already reached out also. So Dr. Carmichael, who's the expert advisor to the Committee for Climate Change, Bayes in the Net Zero team at the Cabinet Office, is endorsing the project and heavily involved in this research and leading the research. But we've also had the likes of Krista Mayer at UCL, who's really interested in supporting us, Colin Strong at Ipsos, who's really interested in supporting it. And people have been amazing. I mean, all of those 3 professors are helping us pro bono because they believe in the project and they believe in the outcomes, which will be a blueprint which we can share with all community groups, whether they're transition groups or not, about what's worked, what hasn't worked, the practicalities, but also embedding in that the behavioural science elements that none of us can afford to do alone. And then secondly, this behavioural science report, which will be peer reviewed and then shared with government departments, shared with council departments. And I mean the council officers and civil servants who really get it, who want to drive this forward, but have their hands tied by the fact that at the moment, this is not necessarily a vote driver. And therefore the funding isn't there for this in-depth analysis and this research work that they need to make sure that the public understand what they're offering and what they could be doing, and they can impactfully engage with it. So the other part of that is, so one part is the blueprint and one part is the report. And the report will be shared not only with government and councils, but with every charity, community group and NGO that's working in sustainability or the environment. So you could be Mums for Lungs and focusing on breathing. You could be the World Wildlife Trust, or you could be the Woodland Trust, to have your specific areas. But this is going to be 360 because we have had a 360 approach to sustainability to avoid silos. So I'm super excited and looking forward to working with some businesses that really get it so that we can fund the second stage, but really grateful to Bayes, the lottery, the council and everyone else who's helped fund us so far.
Fantastic. Thank you, Parisa. Would you like me to show the pictures?
Oh, yes. Gosh. So show the pictures, Richard. Sorry.
And we're just over 10 minutes. So that's what I indicate.
If you don't mind showing them, that would be amazing. So yeah, that's the hub on the outside. The Library of Things logo. And then there should be a shot of the inside as well, I think. There we go. So that's what the hub looks like on the inside. So we've got, what it doesn't show you is at the beginning, we've got a sofa space, so people can just come in and sit down. And on one wall, we have a selfie wall. On the other wall, we have the library of things. And then we have space set up for all the workshops, talks, and demos that we do with people. And then there's that sort of seating area for people to come in. It's always 2 volunteers at any one time manning it, so people can come in and say, I feel frustrated, I feel overwhelmed, where do I start? Or they can ask about a specific thing that they want to share with their community, or something they've learned, or something they're frustrated with. So the drive is for people to engage, and then for them to engage with their politicians and brands accordingly. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Parisa, for sharing that story, and just incredible to see it kind of growing at such a speed, and all the different approaches that you've been using as well. And as you say, really exciting to kind of be in a more mainstream space, right, where you're able to reach a completely different audience, and that research on how you meet people where they are, how we communicate well with people, how we essentially link to kind of their self-interest and what matters to them, and then kind of connect that to the local community and what's going on around them, is really inspiring and really important. So thank you so much for sharing. Really, really great.